So you were born in Germany and you started taking percussion lessons, and that kind of kick-started this whole thing for you. But I was curious, like, if there was a specific thing that inspired you to start doing percussion or drums.
Wow, that's a really great question. So after I got out of the military, and like you mentioned, I was born in Germany. My dad was in the army, and so I kind of already had that, I guess, that military bug. And then my sister went to the Air Force prior to me joining. And so after I got out of the military, honorably discharged in 2014,
Mhm.
and I realized I had this opportunity to kind of create and do whatever I wanted. Like I didn't have the military being like, all right, we're going to play this music. We need you to play like this. And so because I had that freedom and flexibility, and then what really made me start combining drums and percussion and all that stuff was not having the space to set up a drum set. So I got out of the military, I got married, and my husband currently is a pilot, but we were living in a really small studio apartment. And I was like, all right, nowhere to set up drums, but we had a separate garage, and this was in Corpus Christi, Texas, and so it would be super hot in the summer, like it would be really hot. But then I started being like, all right, I don't have enough space to set up a bass drum. Let me try to just use a cajon. It's smaller, and I would take my SPDSX to get some of the type of loop going, and then I just started working on stuff like that. And I was like, man, I was like, I don't know if people are gonna understand this. I don't really know what this is, and I started posting that stuff on Instagram, and it just started going crazy. And I was just like, people were like, "What are you doing? This is amazing!" And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm just trying stuff. So that was kind of the beginning.
That's interesting. Yeah, so it's probably impossible to say for sure, but it might be the very fact that you were doing something different by necessity because you weren't able to play your full drum kit at the time that caused you to be different enough that people were like, "Oh, what's going on with her?"
Yeah, exactly. That was it. Yeah. Just not having the space, and my ears were getting more attuned to like having bongos and having djembe, and I was playing the drum set, but I was like, man, I hear all this other stuff that I want to do. And so I would just try to do everything.
Yeah. What genres of music do you think, if you had to pick two or three, were like most inspirational to you in creating what's kind of your current style and approach?
Afrobeat, Afrobeat definitely, Latin, specifically, I would say salsa, and just being some of my favorite drummers like Horatio Hernandez. Like he was like the first one I saw. I know him and Antonio Sanchez both do the feet type thing where you have the
Mhm.
clave going, and I was just so amazed by that. And I was like, man, I really want to do that. And then Thomas Lang, of course, doing the multiple. And so like seeing that as I was developing, and once I got some money, I was like, all right, let me try to get these extra pedals. Let me actually try to do this stuff. But yeah, Afrobeat, Latin. My dad is from Nigeria, so I think subconsciously he would play music from his village in Nigeria, and that's kind of what I grew up on. Like on a Saturday morning, he would just pop that in, and so it was like in there. And so even now, like I might hear something, and it'll come out in my playing, and people from all different parts of Africa, and they're like, "Oh, this is this rhythm. You're playing this," and I'm like, "Oh, cool." So
Yeah, it's all in the lineage, isn't it? And you don't have to go too far back. Like drums as like an American invention, like I think yeah, so like you can kind of trace rock back to jazz, which is like New Orleans. New Orleans came through the Caribbean, and like all of this stuff comes from Africa. So to a degree, it's like flavors, right? It's like if the flavors are kind of interrelated, then it's no big surprise. But it is interesting when you sort of just discover that like, oh yeah, this thing and the seemingly unrelated thing like just fit together like puzzle pieces. That's really interesting.
yeah, so it's been I want to dive into it more, and like uh especially like with Latin stuff too and African stuff, understanding the rhythms and knowing what these rhythms are. But mostly for now, it's kind of really authentic, and it's just it's like kind of whatever's kind of floating around in my head.
Well, I'm curious to dive into practice routines because I've been obsessed with that lately. And I see on your Instagram, we're working on some similar things when it comes to improvisation and just like the modern drum improv canon of just creating shapes around the drums. But I'm curious, like, what does an average practice routine look like for you this month? Like, what are the things top of mind that you're working on?
So at the top of the year, we'll start with that. Left hand traditional grip was a big strengthening that. And so I know like that's a different technique, but working that also I feel like works, both. And so I would spend time strengthening my thumb because I was kind of inspired by Grayson Recruitment, and I'm working on a Buddy Rich solo. So to do it justice, I really wanted to be able to play that famous crescendo roll. So doing that, wanted to build up my marching chops, and so that side of it was kind of how it went at the beginning of the year. And then I'm always working on my left foot, specifically with my clave and the cowbell. And then I love working on ostinatos because I feel like it's just so important to have the foundation while you're just ripping on top. And then recently bringing it into like the last couple months, I'm like, I want to chop. I want to be able to just like, I want to rip. And so it's not necessarily my style because I'm really known for like the percussive side of it. But I'm like, Shed Tracks. I've been listening to Shed Tracks and just really trying to open up because I really do appreciate the creativity, the power, and the chops that a lot of these drummers have. So for me, it's like I just want to be able to do everything, and that's kind of my background. Being in the military, they wanted us to play everything. They're like, all right, we need you in the big band. Oh, we need you to play this ceremony. All right, get out there. We need you to march. Like every single aspect of drums and percussion. So that's kind of why I'm just a little bit all over the place. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to take some of these one by one, actually, to deep dive. How is the Buddy Rich solo going?
So it's getting close, and so seeing Grayson play it, kind of was like, oh, can actually be done. Because like I tried to work on it, and I was like, the way I needed to push myself to be able to do it, I'm like, I feel like this may not be possible. But then when I saw him and I saw how he explained his technique, I'm like, oh, this is definitely possible. And so it was like a goal to build up my chops to be able to do that. So that's been on my list. I've also been diving into like solos and music with Michelle Camilo.
Speaking of Horacio.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just been diving into stuff like that. And so to answer your question, it's going well, but I don't know if I necessarily want to share it until it's like finished. And I will say sometimes I do put stuff out there and it's not complete. And I'm like, hey, you can witness the the process.
Right. How do you think about the balance between traditional and matched with the left hand? And I'll just put my cards on the table. Eventually, because I've been playing trad through college and for most of the years after that, because I was doing mostly jazz. And more, I would gravitate towards some things matched, but I was just doing like a crappy version of matched with the left hand. And eventually I kind of just made the decision to consolidate everything to matched because there are areas where traditional is superior, like jazz, brushes, marching, all those things. But I felt like the ability to focus all my time on one thing and not to split the reps of the left hand between traditional and matched eventually outweighed that. Then again, you're probably practicing a lot more hours than I was. But I'm interested how, like, do you do one day on, one day off? How do you balance those?
Whenever I pick up the sticks, and this is probably because I started off as a traditional player once I started to get into school, like middle school, we were just on a table, like banging, just like building all those muscles, like ripping on ring finger and building up the calluses. So even today, when I pick up a pair of sticks, I'm warming up traditional grip, even if I'm not going to play, even if I'm not going to sit down and play it. And so I think that's kind of what helped me maintain a little bit of my chops. And then when I decided to actually dig into trying to bring back my traditional chops to like rip on some of the solo stuff I'm working on, it was kind of there because it's been maintained throughout the years. So to answer your question, as soon as I pick up sticks, I'm warming up traditional. Like I'm going to play it and then I'll switch over to match and warm up there, warm up the fingers and all that stuff.
Did you find it a challenge initially to migrate to matched with the left hand?
Yeah, it was tough. And I even learned it wrong.
Same.
Before I started taking lessons with my my instructor, like I was having the stick was on the middle finger instead of the ring finger. And so we had to fix that. My reading stuff was kind of messed up. I was just kind of like trying to teach myself, and I was just making a lot of mistakes. And so after I got with my instructor, he was actually in the Army band, the Perching Zone. And so like playing in DC, played for the President of the United States, did like 30 years active duty as the drummer. And so like I got with him and it was just like, oh, like we're going to correct all of this. Like we're diving into all of this. And so like he was big on traditional grip. And I mean, one of the best looking left fingers where you just like bounce it. It's just like so fire. But yeah, he's the one that really helped me kind of hone in and fix a lot of my stuff.
If you were giving advice to somebody switching from trad to matched, what would you say are like the biggest mistakes to avoid with the left hand?
Yeah, I've seen kids coming in too, because I teach now, and it's tough because there's the marching traditional grip, and then there's the jazz like style traditional grip, which I don't even think many people have made videos that talk about this, but I was even looking around for it. I'm like, part of the issue I had when I joined the military was like my marching traditional grip, I was trying to play jazz with a marching traditional grip. And like in school, you're like graded on your sound, and at the A school for the military. And so they're like, everything you play sounds like you're playing a march and you're supposed to be playing jazz. And I'm like, I don't know how to fix this. But as soon as I started watching videos, YouTube was getting bigger. And I noticed a lot of jazz players, they would have their stick more like this and like this, and marching, you're flat. And so that's one thing I really noticed. And that is what really helped me figure out the two different sides. And so now when I play jazz, I sound more like I'm playing jazz rather than I'm playing marching snare and playing jazz. One thing to, I would say if you're a marching traditional player, I would say try to avoid, some kids play like this. Like, and this is, I feel like this is okay if you're going to be doing if you're going to be swinging, but I would even argue to say that it needs to be more closed in like this and not necessarily like this, unless you're doing a roll. So there's so many different, levels of it. I would say definitely build up your thumb, whether you're a marching traditional player or like a drum set traditional player. Build the thumb, build the calluses here on the ring finger, and avoid the like this or like this, like making the wrong shape.
It looks like an injury waiting to happen.
Yeah, no, like some kids try to force it, or they're more like this, this like the claw.
They're not going to get away with that in middle age.
Yeah, I know. So I'm just like, I don't know. What really helped me was starting off with the thumb, building the thumb, and even something like this, where you just will eventually come into you being able to, power it with your thumb, and then you bring in the ring finger, and then you have these two. I spent a lot of time doing this because I needed to build up that. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, I would say just build the thumb first.
And what would you say is the equivalent for matched? Like if you're switching from trad to matched with the left hand, because you were saying that you had some bad habits with your left hand match grip, and then you got with their teacher, and he helped you fix them. In retrospect, like what would you have told your past self to avoid doing when you switched to match?
Oh yeah, that's great too. Cause my match was jacked up. My left hand, cause my match was jacked up too. The left hand gave me a lot of problems on my journey just because
Yeah.
it's the left hand and it's weaker. And so I would be trying to rip through my rudiments, and I would like, this was getting to the point where I started recording myself, and I would listen back and I'm like, oh man, this sounds like trash. Like this does not sound clean. Yeah. And so I took some time and I got really strict with all of my movements. And I'm like, okay, if this is a full stroke, I need to come here every time. And so I took about a week or two and I just worked on my left hand. And so after I did that, because I realized if I keep working on both hands together, that my right hand was just going to keep getting faster. And yeah, so I'm like, okay, I need to just sit down. And a big thing for me was we play like this when you're playing match. And so, or you play like kind of like this, just depending. But I was playing like this and I couldn't tell what was happening under the stick. And so I started doing this where I would flip my stick over and I just started staring at my fingers. And I just started like doing the motion that would be happening under the stick as if I was playing normally. And so seeing that helped me understand the mechanics of what I needed to do. And so after doing that, and I would just practice on the pillow. I would do this like, because I was like, I don't want to be practicing my left hand during the day when I wouldn't be like playing drum set. So I'm going to do this at night before I would go to bed. So I would like have my sticks, just like working this motion with the left hand, trying to build the reps. Because that's all it really is. Like, how many times have you sat and done this? And then the left hand, like we both know, the left hand is weaker. And so I would be mindful about, you know what? Instead of lifting this bag with my right hand, I'm going to lift it with my left. I'm just going to exercise the left more. And so it gets more time doing stuff. And so like after I had done that for like a good 2 weeks, I rolled into school and I was just like, and everyone was like, all the drummers were like, dude, like, how did you do that? And I was like, oh man, yeah. It was a bit of a thing, but yeah, that was kind of how I was able to fix my left hand. I had to isolate it because it's giving me too many problems.
Do you feel like your background in the military gave you a leg up in terms of being organized and being able to sort of just like break down a problem and annihilate it? Or do you think that was always sort of just intrinsic to your personality?
I think the military definitely helped because it helps you with learning how to practice, learning what to practice, and then witnessing how what you practice has developed. And then, like I mentioned, like we're graded and you can see an actual score at the end of, a 3-month cycle or a 6-month cycle. Cause the School of Music is usually going for 6 months here it's actually here in Virginia. And Norfolk, Virginia is the military, like A school or whatever. Each branch calls it something different. It's military music school, essentially. And so they have a grade sheet. And each one of your rudiments is graded from fail to pass to like extraordinary. And so like you can look at the score and be like, hey, when I walked in 6 months ago, I could not play my paradiddle this fast or clean or whatever. And so you can watch the progress. So to answer your question, I think so. Like, I think the military definitely taught me how to practice, how to prepare for stuff. Like if I get gigs, like I've had gigs even outside where, and I'm sure you've had them too, where you got like less than a week, like sometimes 2 days to prepare. And it's just like, all right, how am I going to learn this music and make it sound confident and, good quality and with like a very limited time to practice. And so, yeah, that was actually my story when I got to Japan, like my first band. And they were like, all right, you're the big band drummer. We're going on tour in a week. Like learn the show, count the band off, know the tempos. And I'm just like, and I had played big band, but like not going to go perform a big band, with a big band group. And so a lot of mistakes happen. No train wrecks, but But I got a bad reputation, like a little bit, just like, hey, you really, you counted off the wrong tune, just like little things like that. But it was definitely a quick and good learning experience just to kind of be. And I was like 19, just be thrown in. Yeah, yeah, because I didn't go to college after high school. I went straight into the military. I was like, I want to get paid to play drums and I want to travel the world. Like that was my two things.
Had you checked out much jazz before then?
I was listening and so like, and even so I was in the jazz band and stuff like that, but high school jazz band, it doesn't compare to a professional level band. And so to answer your question, yes, but I quickly learned like, oh, this is a sound, and we did not have that sound in high school. So it was just more so my ears really had to develop. That's what it really came down to. Like my ears had to develop to listen, and then my hands just had to be able to, all right, little things like, all right, this is a marching type of thing I'm trying to push into a jazz thing. Don't do that, And so I'm sure a lot of marching cats out there that are trying to transition to drum set probably experience the same thing. It's just like if you spent 5-10 plus years on a marching snare and you try to come and play jazz or play a drum set, it's going to be kind of weird.
And you said it was only after leaving the military that you started going in a different direction and like incorporating the Latin and Afrobeat stuff.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the practice routine a little bit. Because I've also dabbled with left foot ostinatos, and one thing I was trying to do for a few months last year, just because a student and I were kind of doing it together, but was doing like 5/8 ostinatos, like chick 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 chick, while trying to improvise over the top of that, and I think I got like medium good to where I could sort of fudge some things and then sort of lost interest. But I'm curious, as somebody who spent a lot of time with this, like, so you see somebody like Antonio Sanchez or Horacio, if you want to build that skill into a really, really good level, how would you sequence that for a student? Like, what does month 1, month 2, month 3 look like if their ultimate goal is to have complete freedom with like an ostinato in the left foot?
That's a really good question. So how I went about it, and when I became interested in it, there wasn't much information. And so I was actually just thinking about this the other day because I'm working on new ostinatos, and I remember how I would practice them. And so I would start with one part, like if I'm trying to work the left foot, the heel of my left foot, or just trying to go back and forth between the hi-hat and the woodblock or the cowbell. I would just have to sit with that. I would just sit with that and get used to like how that feels without necessarily even thinking about what the left foot's doing or the right hand or the left hand. And so I could spend, a whole practice session on that. And then I would start bringing in music. And so I would start listening to what the rest of the band's doing, what the rest of my limbs are supposed to be doing while I'm just focusing on my left foot. And so, cool, I got that going. I'm hearing what this right foot's supposed to be doing in relation to what the left foot's doing.
So you're not playing anything with the other limbs yet. You're listening to stuff while you only work on the left foot. Okay.
Right. Because it's like these rhythms that a lot of these players they grew up with it from being a baby. It's just there. And so it's like internal. So how do I internalize something that I didn't grow up with? I have to just sit and listen and try to focus in on one piece. And so I would get one piece down, and I would try to add another layer, and then it would explode. Like, it's just like everything would just get messed up. My left foot's messed up. I'm trying to play something with my right hand, and now it's all jacked up. And so the next thing I did I would bring in a metronome. I would bring in a metronome and slow it way down. And part of what I did was I realized having my right hand on the snare and trying to listen to what my left foot was doing was not helping. So I took my right hand, I stared at my left foot, and I did the right hand and left foot, and I saw where they overlapped. And I'm like, oh, like this makes a lot of sense. It overlaps on the and or the E, and then it's not overlapping here. And so I could see the fluidity, like the wave of rhythm that was happening, because I could see literally staring at both of them happening at, so that was what really helped me be able to kind of progress forward. Because prior to that, I was just trying to like, I'm like, I know what this hand's supposed to be doing. I know what this was supposed to be doing. But like, as soon as I start trying to play them, it's not working. And so putting them together and looking at them was helpful. And then the next thing I would do, and this is what I recently did when I was trying to work on I think it was a 5-3 polyrhythm. And my husband is a musician as well. And so we were like just sitting here, like banging our head on like, okay, you know what? I just need to hear both of them. So I like went into my DAW and I recorded both of them. And I was like, oh, wow, that's what they sound like. Slowed it down. Like, oh, that's what they sound like when they're being played together. It's because sometimes it's just like the fact that you haven't heard it like at a slow tempo in order to be able to play it. So my process is very, very basic and super slow because I'm a visual person. Like I need to see the overlap. And I feel like that has really helped me with rudiments, with everything, like slowing it way down to the point where it's just like agonizing. It's just so slow, but that helps my brain get it way faster than me trying to just power through and play it fast and then kind of sounding mediocre or just really sloppy. Like after I slowed it down, I'm like, oh, I got it. And then gradually speeding it up is so much easier. So that's what I've noticed for when I was back in high school trying to fix my rudiments. It was like, all right, single stroke roll, I want the sound clean. All right, what am I doing wrong? All right, I'm not coming to the same position every time. And so same thing with ostinato. All right, or clave, I need to see what's happening. Okay, this is what's happening slowly. Okay, let me gradually speed it up. And that's the same thing I do with my students too. Like, I mean, because like once you slow something down, you're just like, oh, it's just like, it's just so much easier, And so I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of been my process. Setting one foot at a time, listening to that music while I'm practicing the 1 foot, adding and slowly adding limbs has been what's helped me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When you were talking about watching visually what the foot's doing as you're playing the right hand, were you still keeping the right stick on the snare, but just moving your gaze to your feet, or what were you doing with the right hand then? On your knee or something?
This is the attachment. This was one of the first ones my mom bought for me back when I was in high school, actually. But anyways, so I would have the left foot doing this, and I would move my hand to even like the side of the cowbell. And so I could see my foot moving and I could see my hand moving. And so that was what I just needed it to be closer, because it was just the distance from the snare to my foot was too far. And because it's just some lag time, not lag time, but it's just not as close. And so just like when I was practicing with my fingers and like had to stare at them to realize what was happening, it's like, oh, that's what's happening. Okay. Then it gives me the confidence to be like, oh, I can do this, right? Like I know what's happening. Because prior to that, it was just like, I'm not sure what's happening. I don't really know what's happening. But now I would be like, oh, I know what's happening. I wrote it out. That's another thing I started doing with something as simple as like the bossa nova, which gives a lot of my students issues because, it's over a 2-bar and then and so like writing it out, they get it so quick because it's just like, you can see it. This is lining up. You got to hit this and so, yeah, that's what's really helped me. I think what it really comes down to is just having the interest to really do it, because it does take a lot of time. And then what I also noticed is like, you can get it down, but then it doesn't sound good, right? You're playing everything perfectly right, but it sounds robotic, or it just doesn't have that like vibe, the authenticity. And so that's also been like, just sitting and listening more. Maybe it's a little more swung, maybe it's just like the way the band's playing it's just making it feel a little bit different. And then so it's like listening to, and that's kind of what I do now. Like after I got the technical part, right? And it's like, okay, this is hitting exactly where blah, blah, blah. Now it's like, now how do I make it feel good?
Yeah, there's that whole other layer, isn't there? When you watch somebody like Antonio or Daphnis Prieto, where the mechanics are so ingrained that they're making like a bigger phrase over the top of it. And it's I think it's similar to what we do when we chop, because there are those like differentiated stick heights. Right, like you've got this sort of chatter of the ghost notes happening, and then you've got accents that are popping out, and then once all those little micro pieces are ingrained, then you can kind of make more legato movements around the kit and like shape phrases. But in the same way, it's like, from what I hear you describing, if you're doing some kind of coordination ostinato thing, like just having the mechanics, just having the sequence of the events is only sort of the first part, and then you have to infuse back into it that human element, that human phrasing.
Yeah, the sauce. Gotta have that sauce on there.
I was talking about this with a student the other night, and one thing that I've struggled with as a teacher is explaining. So say you're talking to someone who hasn't necessarily crossed over to seeing work translated into success with like a particular thing. Maybe they're good at a bunch of things, but there's like a particular skill you're working on. One thing that's been a conundrum for me to explain sometimes is like, if the ultimate goal is to be able to forget the mechanics and phrase with it in a human way, why are we sweating the mechanics in the first place? What's the difference between mastering all these mechanics and then forgetting them, or just skipping directly to the emotion? And when I see things on YouTube, and when I see things in some of my YouTube comments, I think it is a real thing that like people equate learning technique with being robotic, or like forgetting how to be emotional, or how to be human. And the analogy I was thinking of, and this is pretty nerdy, but I used to play golf when I was in high school. I wasn't ever any good, but I did get to a point where if I were practicing a lot, like I could hit it decently far and decently straight. And there's a difference between really unloading on a ball and having it slice into the bushes, and really unloading on a ball and having all of those mechanics working for you so that you can consistently hit it straight. And I feel like the feeling of having those mechanics underlying and then being able to like turn on the sauce on top of that is similar to the feeling of like being able to apply a lot of power to something, but also maintaining control. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you have a better analogy in mind, but this is something obviously I've been thinking about a lot.
Right. No, it makes sense. And like what kind of stuck out was like technique and robotic, right? That's like, and I even witnessed that when I was in school, like before I even learned how to play the clave and the right foot and have all the things going, there were guys that were playing that, and I'm like, but this sounds bad. It doesn't sound good. I'm like, you're playing everything right, but it sounds robotic. Like you could never go to any of these countries and they would like be happy with that. I feel like, and so that was kind of an eye-opening thing too. It was just like, I want to make sure I sound authentic. And so when I first started, I sounded robotic because you're just trying to get it. And then after I think relaxation also has to do with it, right? So like if you're not relaxed, you're going to be rigid. And so as you get more comfortable with this stuff, it gets more relaxed and it just gets more fluid. And so now I can sit down and I'm not even trying, and I'll be popping out a 3-2 or a 2-3 clave, and I'm like, oh, wow, it's just. And I also think too, I think it's how for me, how I practice it. And so like, as soon as I might be playing like a tumbao with the bass drum, and then my left foot's like, oh, you want to play two. And I'm like, sometimes I just want to do a quarter note. I don't want to play that right now. And so it's like, now I'm trying to control it is what it's coming to. Cause I've sat for, it's been, man, over 3 years, just trying to make it feel good. And I finally got, I think it was like maybe last year when I'm like, oh, okay, I think this is sounding like something. but I don't know. I wanted it so bad. I wanted to be able to do it. And so it was just that drive. And I will say what really kind of checked the box for me was back before the shutdown, after I finished the military, graduated college, and I was like checking my email, looking for like who's picking me up, what tour am I going on, like let's go. Like I was so ready. It was before I had my son, so I was just like, man, let's go. And so I got an email from this artist out of Mallorca, Spain. And she was like, we've been watching your material. Like, we want to start a group with like all girl group. We want to play like Latin jazz essentially. And I was like, oh, like, do I have that sound right now? Like, can I actually do that? No. So that was kind of like, wow, am I sounding like authentic? I guess it was like after all the struggling of sounding like a robot to get someone who's like lived in this country be like, hey, you want to go on tour? And I'm like, yeah, wow, I'm there, I guess.
That must have been validating.
Yeah, for sure. It was, I think it was needed too, because I was just like, I was kind of hard on myself. Just like, I don't want to sound like a robot.
So I asked earlier if you thought you'd imported any ethos from the military that helped you practice. And one thing I'm picking up, because obviously I'm fascinated by how good players got good. that's sort of the big question underlying everything with the podcast is just digging and hearing different people's stories. So from where I sit, it feels to me like there are four things that pop out to me like about your approach to practice, and I hope I can remember all four. Okay, so number one is this binary. Like it's either good enough or it's not, and there's no fudging, right? So like the military grading your paradiddles. It's like either it's a check mark or it's not. Like either it's standard or it's below the standard. That sort of unflinching ability to sort of look at something and say, yeah, no, that's not good enough. I think the second one is the ability to break down a problem. So to take like one big problem and break it down into other things. I think 3 would be like the faith that if you spend enough time, like you'll have a good result. Because, you know, I've met a lot of drummers and taught a lot of students, and not everyone necessarily has that to that degree. So that's definitely something like I'm taking notes. And I think number 4 would be patience. Like listening to you describe how long you spent on these certain things and how long you were able to persist playing them like at a slower tempo. It definitely makes me think like, oh yeah, you're more willing to persist through burnout and through boredom and through a bunch of different things. And it's no big surprise that at the end of the day, that adds up to success.
Wow. That's a great summary.
I'm also curious to talk a little bit about chops because, okay, so chops are interesting per se, right? Because like everybody wants to chop. But I also just think like it's a great place to look at how our brain kind of constructs things, because it's just like we're not reading off of a piece of music. It's just all we have is like a shed track, and we can play anything we want on the drums. So like how do we bootstrap that process so that we get to a place where, just like the clave stuff, you can just shut off your brain and go. And one thing that I feel like is, by practicing different regimes of improvisation, it feels like each time for me, the process gets slightly quicker. And part of that for me may be that, so I think one big thing I picked up this past couple of months was, if I want to play faster, just try to keep fewer balls in the air. Like, don't feel like I need to have 10 different chops that I'm switching between and among. If I want to play 16ths at like 200, like just take 3. Right? Just like alternate between 3. So I'm curious if there's a parallel thing for you where when you started approaching improvisation or chops, if there were any lessons you took from your previous successes that you felt like shortened the learning curve for you.
I guess, I mean, we can even like currently diving into shed tracks, and I feel personally right now I don't have the vocabulary. Like, I've worked all my rudiments, I did all that stuff, and now I feel like I have a little bit of vocabulary, but the amount of vocabulary, rhythmic vocabulary I need to quickly like execute some of this stuff, like even my brain's like, no, we didn't go over this. No, like and so like that's kind of where I'm at right now, where I'm just trying to open up the fluidity and I don't know, like just how we're speaking right now, where it becomes second nature. That's kind of what I'm working on right now. But what was your question again?
No, just how do your previous successes, like you're having worked through the Latin jazz and the coordination stuff to such a degree that you're able to sound human and authentic at it, what lessons do you take from that inform how you approach like the next challenge?
So I listen to a shed track and then I go watch other drummers play it. And then I think about like, I would play this differently. And so it's like you get the inspiration from others, but you also want to be true to your sound. And so I feel like that's kind of how I approach new stuff. Is I want to make sure I take, my everything that I've spent so many years working on. And I think a really good example of that is like when you have three drummers kind of, for example, the Dave Weckl, Vinny, and Steve Gadd, right?
The Buddy Rich concert, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so like you all really different sounds. And like Steve Gadd, like he was in the Army band, like, and it comes out in his playing, and it's just, and it works. And when he plays, if he sat down and played a shed track, you would know it's Steve Gadd because of the way he has his it's just so authentic to who he is. And so to answer your question, I try to take everything that I've learned, even if it may not be appropriate for the genre, like still it's authentic, it's my voice, it's my sound. And so that's kind of what I think about too. Like I don't want to necessarily go into playing a shed track and just play it like 10 other drummers just played it, because that is the sound too. Like that is their history. They're coming from, a lot of them like gospel, grown up in church playing, and then that's there. But my story is a little bit different. I wanted to play in church, 5-year-old little Cami, and they're just like, no. And so like almost kind of being rejected from the church as a drummer, and then being like, all right, I'm going to go the academic route. I'm going to go this way, and I'm going to go to the military. That's not the story for a lot of other drummers. And so that's kind of what it's been for me. And so that's what I plan to take. That's what I'm taking over to shed tracks, and the new stuff that I learn. Like when you get me, you get my voice. It's going to sound, hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. And you also hinted at something else that I've been thinking a lot about, which is recently drawing this distinction between if I see something on Instagram and I'm like, oh, that's hot, and then not immediately feeling like, okay, well, I need to do exactly the same thing, but putting a decision point there where it's like, but is this something I feel like I want to integrate into my voice, or am I interested in other things? And there are so many shiny objects, so it's super easy to just feel like we're obligated to sound like everybody else. So I'm curious if that's as tough a decision for you, or if you just have a bright line there and it's super easy for you to say, okay, this is on the Cami wants to learn it side, and this is on the other side.
That's a good question too, because I do see drummers and percussionists, and I'm like, oh wow, that technique is slightly different. The phrasing is different. And so if anything, I am mostly inspired by it. And so I try not to take anything that anyone has created and learn it exactly, because I don't want to play it exactly the same way. I want to add something to it, or I just want, and so yeah, I guess to answer your question, I do get distracted by all the shiny new, shops and stuff like that. But I also just try to be like, okay, that's cool. Now, how can I take a little bit of that and apply it in my own way? So then it's also creative and not just, which I mean, I know drummers do that. Like they transcribe and it's perfect. But I will say sometimes like you play this transcription perfectly, but then when I see them in a live setting, they're not necessary. The vocabulary still isn't there. Like you just practice someone's amazing solo perfectly, and then I wasn't like I didn't even hear some of that come out. And so it's like, can you watch something? Can you learn something and then add it, or did you just learn it exactly? So I don't know. That's just my thinking. I think everyone kind of is able to interpret and do stuff in their own way. But for me, I'm all like, hey, look at it a little bit and then go and create something.
Well, I think that shows a lot of discipline, but yeah, it's something that I've struggled with, but as I get older, it's getting easier. And I guess one thing that sort of guides me is like, if there's something that somebody's doing that I already understand, then I can be like, okay, well, do I want to go more in this direction or not? But if there's something I don't understand, then sometimes I'll just save it. I'll file it away like, yeah, let's investigate this later if the desire strikes me.
Yeah, I mean that's true. It is a lot of over stuff. It's a lot of stuff. And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed or overloaded by all the amount of content that is coming out. And I feel like it's even been more within the last, like after the shutdown, it was just like everyone was at home, everyone was producing, everyone is just, and so I even saw that more. So, but actually for myself during the shutdown, I was working on my album. Like I had focused in and I was like, I'm gonna produce an album. So I wasn't necessarily watching other people too much, but I don't know, like it's just so easy to just sit and kind of like, oh wow, that's super cool. And then realize, oh man, I need to go practice. I need to learn this song, Exactly. And so, yeah, the balance is what I'm trying to do right now too.
Well, you mentioned your album and that's a great segue. I think a great place to end things would be, what projects do you have going on these days that you're most excited about?
Well, that's a good question too. So with the new year coming up, I want to dive more into kind of what I initially started doing when I started making videos. And that was like creating loops, creating rhythms. And that was like the foundation of my social media growing. And so I wanted to get back to that because part of the reason why I strayed away from it was because I was trying to dive more into, as a person sitting down at this kit, I want to sound like there are several things going on. Because like when I turned off the loop, I was like, what do I sound like? And I was like, man, there's too many holes. And so I was like, I want to be able to play this stuff like I got the loop going. And so that's what I spent. I don't know. That's what I was saying. I spent a few years trying to do that. And now that I got it, now I can go back to actually, fully like doing the full presentation. And so, yeah, with the coming year, diving more into that, continue to work on music because I'm always writing. Like I have lyrics that I write that I work with a vocalist. I work within the military. So I send her stuff because I can't sing. And I'm like, hey, can you like hash this out for me? She'll like send me back something amazing. And I'm like, all right, cool. So that's like, that'll work, so that's my goal for the upcoming year. I want to dive more into snare pieces, snare solos and stuff like that. Like I have the Pratt, some of the stuff I did back in high school, just keep my marching chops up. And then I plan to make a video, actually. You might beat me to it, but talking about the marching traditional technique and the jazz, because I don't think enough people kind of talk about that, especially for someone like me who was in the military, was playing big band and sounding like a marching snare drummer trying to play, play this stuff. And then not knowing what's going on, like, oh, this doesn't sound like jazz, like just those question marks.
I think that lane's wide open for you because Yeah, I think you have the marching background to do it. Like I've only ever seen it from the jazz side. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, I don't think there's any danger of me making a competing video in that subject.
I mean, if you do, it'll be more because, like I said, I've looked for it and I haven't found anything. So if you do decide to, it'll just be more information. It'll be good.
Sure.
Either way.
Well, where would you send people to check out what got going on? Like on which socials should people follow you?
I would say my biggest following is on Instagram, but so Cami drum loops. Cami.drum.loops is my Instagram. And then YouTube is Cami.loops official. And so yeah, that's where I'll have a lot of my stuff. I'm trying to get like you, I'm trying to hit YouTube a little bit harder, because YouTube is where it's at, That's you get monetized and they pay you. They pay you on a monthly basis. So that's good.
I have the opposite issue. Instagram is the big shiny object for me. I'm just like, I wish I could crack this Instagram. But then like YouTube takes a lot of time. So perennially, I'm just like, there are things I would want to do on Instagram if I were really like looking to grow, like kind of make content specifically for that. But I can't do both. So Instagram ends up being a little bit incidental. It's just like a practice video on the iPhone. So it goes.
Hey, it counts. It counts. It really does. Like I know you signed with Minor. I think was it last year or?
Yeah, it was like I think early 2022. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think the presence, like having a presence on each social platform with at least over a couple, 1,000 or whatever, it works. It helps. I will say, like, even when I started to try to build my my YouTube, and I was like, man, I hope no one's looking at my YouTube. I had like maybe 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers, and like Tama was like, oh, we saw one of your videos on YouTube. You did a review, and I was like, you mean that crappy review, like unboxing video? Like that's what you guys saw? And like they were like, yeah, seems like you really love Tama. And so I was like, yeah, I do, but like that's what's gonna get me. That's what got me signed.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to share that with my wife because she's a food influencer. She's just starting to get back on YouTube, and the conundrum with YouTube is always like, it takes so long to like build up a following. But it's great to hear people have had success even when their view count wasn't huge. So that's super inspirational.
Yeah, and it was a surprise to me, honestly, because I was like, I didn't know I was there. But you just never know. Like when you're making, you take the time to make the long videos on YouTube and be actually like your videos are very well thought out and they have a story and the progression and you're engaging and you're keeping people interested in it for what, 10, sometimes 20 minutes. That's good. Like that's good. That's good stuff.
This has been a lot of fun. I'm so glad we made it happen. We'll have to do a part 2 at some point, but want to really, really thank you for your time. And I think people are really going to dig it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it. You're awesome. Keep up everything you're doing. And yeah, thanks for having me.